Well, thank you, Paul, and Justin, and all of you for having me. This is my first trip to Hong Kong. It's the last stop on what I've been calling my overnight sensation world tour. Last week, I flew on 13 planes to 4 states, 3 countries, and 2 continents. And that's partially my fault, but not all. And I've been working in school here since I arrived in Hong Kong. The title for my presentation is modestly called The Best Educational Ideas in the World, Adventures on the Frontiers of Learning. And since we got a late start and because I could talk about this subject for months at a time, I'm going to focus primarily on 2 of the big ideas, but briefly mention the rest as well. As Paul mentioned, I've been working in educational computing for the last 32 years, trying to help teachers make sense of the wondrous opportunities that exist for the computer to be used as an intellectual laboratory and vehicle for self-expression, to amplify the potential of every child, to allow them to go in directions that would be impossible otherwise. And I view these opportunities seriously as part of a larger picture of making school the best 7 hours of a kid's life. I think every teacher should wake up every morning and ask themselves, how do I make this the best 7 hours of a kid's life? So one way we can stay in touch is if you send an email of any sort to hey@stager.org. You don't have to write a message. You'll receive my very occasional newsletter and a lot of materials that are related to the talk tonight. You don't have to worry about being spammed. I just got the summer 2007 edition of the newsletter out recently. I'm often a lot more ambitious than I have the ability to execute, but this is a way for us to remain in contact with one another. Now, as I said, it would be arrogant for me to suggest that there are best ideas in education, although I will say that if we're not willing to criticize bad practices, it's impossible to identify best practices. But I think the most powerful idea of all is what my friend Seymour Papert said, the idea of powerful ideas. And as educators, we need to recognize that we stand on the shoulders of giants, that every problem in education has been solved somewhere before. And these various ideas about educating children with and without technology are amplified, are supercharged, are energized by the addition of computing and the computer. So whether it's the maker movement or the Reggio Emilia approach to early childhood education or one laptop per child that has changed the world by putting a low-cost computer in the hands of millions of children in the developing world and forced the entire computer industry to acknowledge the fact that computers don't have to cost $1,200. Generation Yes, a model where students are empowered to provide leadership in their schools in the form of professional development and technical support and peer mentoring. LC Stemma, the Venezuelan Youth Orchestra program. Venezuela, one of the poorest nations in the Western Hemisphere, where 500,000 children play classical music at a world-class level, with a level of commitment and passion that's unparalleled anywhere else in the world, where they're not just making music to make music, but to bring peace and stability and economic vitality and peace of mind to their nation. One of the great things about places like Reggio Emilia and approaches like LC Stemma is their steadfast refusal to succumb to incrementalism. You want an example of incrementalism? There have been computers in your schools for nearly 35 years, and yet we're still trying to find ways to beg, bribe, cajole, trick, coerce, threaten teachers to touch the stuff. That some of the devices your schools are buying don't have the power to do what we were able to do in 1990 at the first schools in the world where every kid had a laptop. As my friend Jonathan Kozol likes to say, you're only 6 once. We need a sense of urgency. It's unacceptable that we're not using computers anywhere near their anywhere near their potential more than 3 decades after they entered your school. So all of these approaches share some common elements. Project-based learning, personal computing, the idea that the computer belongs to you and it's where you construct knowledge and where your ideas are stored and shared. A belief that things need not be as they seem. And they're guided by ideas like respect for each learner or authentic problems solved with real tools and materials. The idea that we can expand opportunities and that learning is natural. If you don't believe that learning is natural, then you have to come up with all sorts of dishonest, coercive tricks to get kids to do things that aren't in their self-interest. We need to have more collegiality between children and adults and lower the level of antagonism between the two groups. We could make arguments that might be even dubious about allowing cell phone use in the classroom. The reason why we should allow cell phones in the classroom is because it's wrong to be arbitrarily mean to children. There are businesses in New York City where the fascist mayor banned cell phones after he suspended democracy and got rid of school boards. And he banned cell phones. Not you can't use them in class, you're not allowed to have them in the building. So as a result, there are companies who park vans near schools and charge poor children $5 a day to store their phone. When you walk into Carnegie Hall or onto an airplane, someone says, please turn off your phone. If you don't do it, there's a social sanction for it. But we need to lower the level of antagonism between children and adults. We need to recognize that the best thing we can do for children, as educators, as parents, as citizens, as neighbors, is to create opportunities for kids to spend as much time as possible in the company of interesting adults. We need to have a renewed commitment to social justice, as I mentioned a moment ago, a greater sense of urgency about our mission and our efforts. A few years ago, I was in the Middle East, and I gave a keynote, and I said that we know what to do. And someone heckled from the audience and said, do we really? And I thought it's a really good question, and I hope to return to it before my time runs out this evening. But I believe that we do. I believe that because we're surrounded by all sorts of people and evidence and practices and traditions and books that say things like the school must open its doors to the community. The chief aim of education should be an all-round drawing out of the best in child, body, mind, and spirit. The sacredness of the child's individuality must be the moving passion of the teacher. It was difficult to get teachers to move away from subject matter and toward children. Or the greatest fallacy of child education is the training for the future idea. Training for the future means dying for the present. And how about playrooms and games, animals and plants, wood and nails must take their place side by side with books and words. Pretty provocative stuff. It's from a book called The Schoolmaster of the Great City by Angelo Petrie. It was published in 1917. This book identifies and solves every single problem in education, and it was penned nearly a century ago. And yet, when I walk into classrooms all over the world, and I have the great privilege and responsibility of spending a lot of time in classrooms everywhere, and I'm able to see patterns and trends, and one of the most disturbing patterns is a wholesale return to whole class instruction. And if a teacher isn't lecturing 8-year-olds from bell to bell, every second of the day is governed by the whim of the teacher anyway. There are no more centers or kids working on independent projects. This manifests itself in all sorts of negative consequences, like teachers not knowing their children because the emotional and physical distance from the learner is too great. It deprives kids of agency. It kills flow. In a primary school in the United States, during settle down time following recess, I wrote a book chapter. That's how much time was wasted on settle down time. And the transitions between moving from one subject to another constantly. And yet we have the audacity to indict kids for having attention deficit disorders when we never let them do anything of substance for more than a couple of minutes. It used to be I could walk into a classroom and say, hey, teacher, can I borrow some kids for a while? And the response was always, sure, how many would you like? No rush returning them. Now I'm greeted with, no, they're busy. And sadly, they tend to be busy with busy work. This isn't our time. It may be their time, but certainly we can compromise and say that it's both of our time. I'm not surprised when kids do extraordinary things. I'm surprised when adults are surprised that kids are capable of doing extraordinary things. Some people are excited that we can use the computer to teach the things we've always wanted kids to know, maybe with greater efficiency or efficacy or comprehension or stickiness. But what drives all of my work is using a computer to create opportunities for kids to learn and do in ways that were unimaginable a couple of years ago. To amplify human potential, to go further than they could have gone without us and without the computer. This is a photo taken in 92 or 93 in one of the early laptop schools in Melbourne, Australia. The kid is programming in Logo Writer, a predecessor to MicroWorlds or Scratch, and in the time that elapsed between hitting the return key and awaiting the result to appear on the screen, every ounce of his being is mobilized in anticipation of the result. He's actually shaking with anticipation. I want kids to wake up in the middle of the night and thinking, I can't wait to get back to school to continue working on what I was doing yesterday. Or to wake up in the middle of the night and think, I've had an epiphany, I have an idea of how to improve that project I've been working on. And one of the really powerful ideas that's been driving my work is the notion that young people have a remarkable capacity for intensity. Young people have a remarkable capacity for intensity, and it's incumbent upon all of us to build upon that capacity for intensity. Otherwise, it manifests itself as boredom or misbehavior or ennui, or perhaps, worst of all, just wasted potential. In this case, and in hundreds like it since, when I encounter a kid with this level of intensity doing great work with the computer, it doesn't take more than a couple of minutes for their teacher to take me aside and whisper in my ear, that kid's not very good at school. Of course they're not. School doesn't match their intensity level. We need to turn up the intensity level of schools. That's not to say we need to increase chaos. Schools have cornered the market on chaos. There's a difference. We need a more expansive, different notion of computing that's worthy of the children. It's part of a continuum of constructive material that ranges from paper and cardboard to microcontrollers and everything in between. That the computer is something with which we make ideas, that knowledge is a consequence of experience, and the computer allows for a greater breadth and depth and range of projects to exist than have ever been possible before. Now, as educators, we need to pay attention to trends outside of school that can have a positive benefit inside of school. We're coming out of a few decades, perhaps a generation or two, of helplessness and unbridled consumerism. When we're faced with a challenge, we just hire a pro instead of doing it ourselves. And yet we're seeing a return to craft traditions and do-it-yourself. And there's literature and magazines and reality television that encourages us to make things, to solve our own problems, take control of our lives. I actually view reality television as a positive trend. That may surprise some of you, but in cultures that are short on apprenticeship experiences, if you want to learn how to build a shed or dance the paso doble or bake a souffle or be a drunken loser, there's some expert you now have access to. And they're lifting the curtain on that expertise. I meet an alarming number of young people who have never had a conversation with an adult, teenagers who have no positive experiences with adults other than being labeled and ranked and sorted and named and graded. And if you're worried about beating Finland, the societal implications of children who don't know how to be adults, who haven't had positive role models and smooth transitions into adulthood, are a lot scarier. So there's this do-it-yourself impulse that's growing, and it's taking the form of something called the maker movement. In our book, my partner Sylvia Martinez and I, and incidentally, we have a small number of books we'd be happy to sell and sign during the reception. In our book, Invent to Learn, Making Tinkering and Engineering in the Classroom, we identified 3 technological game changers that schools and even IT professionals in schools aren't paying enough attention to. And they offer amazing opportunities for kids and adults to be engaged in incredible projects that are fun and deeply meaningful and intellectually rich. The first game changer is fabrication. Until very recently, the only thing you could make on a computer resided on paper or on the screen. Now you can make 3-dimensional objects. Now, that's not to say that we should lose our heads about the significance of this. The really powerful intellectual and creative work is done in the design process. In fact, I think the 3D printer revolution is more about the fact that the software has become accessible than the fact that you can spit out an object. It would be like replacing your English literature curriculum with laser printing. Or we're no longer going to teach Shakespeare and Chaucer. Instead, we're going to cover Helvetica. 3D printing is wicked cool, but we ought to keep it in perspective. The second game changer is a really big one and doesn't get enough conversation about it, and that's physical computing. Simply the idea that we're adding interactivity and intelligence to everyday objects, that we can now sew circuits into clothing with microcontrollers that are machine washable so that our our school blazer has directional signals on the back for when we ride our bike home from school, or our backpack can detect intruders, or our necklace can warn us when a teacher is approaching. And we can make circuits out of paper and clay and all sorts of other things. And then computer programming, not just because it's a vocational path, but because it's a way of having control and agency over an increasingly complex and technologically rich world. Seymour Papert began asking the question in the mid-1960s, does the computer program the child or the child program the computer? If you want to have any agency or control over any of these complex systems, kids need real computer science experiences. All kids. So there are three intellectual influences that are kind of at the base of this maker revolution. Seymour Papert worked with Piaget, helped him understand mathematics, invented Logo, the first robotic systems for kids. In the 60s, started talking about every kid having a computer. Neil Gershenfeld, who was a colleague of Papert's at MIT, runs the Center for Bits and Atoms. He wrote a book about a half a dozen years ago called Fab, in which he predicted that the next major technological revolution was going to be personal manufacturing, desktop fabrication. The idea that if you wanted to buy a watch for your father's birthday a generation ago, you could have to get off from work early, run down to the shop, hope they had what you wanted in stock. Now you could go online, pick out the watch you wanted. It's delivered in a truck a few days later. Gershenfeld suggested that in the very near future, you would find the best features of 3 or 4 watches you liked, combine them, put a picture of the grandchildren on the face, print the watch out yourself, or indeed email it to your father in another part of the world. He began teaching a course a decade ago at MIT called How to Make Almost Anything, where he thought originally that only senior engineering students would be interested in such a class, and found out that the basic human impulse to create, to invent, was so strong that students camp out overnight for a chance to get into class. And then there's Make Magazine, which is kind of the Gutenberg Bible of the maker movement. We have this convergence of science, technology, engineering, mathematics, fabrication, all kinds of new materials for building circuitry, and we're elevating what we're doing with a culture, with an aesthetic that comes from craft traditions, of doing things with our hands, of making things that are personally meaningful and beautiful. You know, I learned how to program when I was 12 years old at a public school in New Jersey. At the same time, I learned how to compose music and play the trumpet and do most of the things that bring beauty and joy and purpose and meaning to my life. And yet, if you walked into that classroom tomorrow, the curriculum is keyboarding instruction, where kids are undoubtedly being tested on whether they can identify the spacebar and return key at 13 years of age. This is a lowering of standards. And I often wondered, under what conditions could hobbyist programming return? But we live in an anti-intellectual culture where people say they want their kids to make Bill Gates money, but they don't want them to learn how to program. And after all, not everyone needs to learn how to program. Not everyone needs to know how to build an engine to drive a car. You've heard all that crap. Well, my daughter took up knitting and crocheting when she was 14, and no one ever said to her, Yvonne, why are you crocheting that hideous scarf? You can buy a better one at Target for 90% less. But there's a cultural value associated with making things. And as Seymour Papert said, if you can make things with computers, then you can make a lot more interesting things, and you can learn a lot more by doing so. We have opportunities for adults and children to learn together. And frankly, I think this might be our last shot at keeping schools viable and of returning or re-energizing or reanimating or bringing back from the dead, whatever term you want to use, the best progressive traditions of education. Papert said that Dewey had the technology to make language arts and humanities and social studies come alive in a project-based fashion. But it's only been in recent times that computationally rich technologies have made it possible for the kids to have similar experiences in maths and science and engineering. So I firmly believe that making things is better than being passive, but that making good things is even better. And we have to raise our standard about what we consider good. We need to stop presenting at conferences, kids writing, printing a mind map in color or, an acrostic or a Wordle. Kids are capable of doing extraordinary things, as you're going to see in a couple of moments. With the widespread availability of computers and the related peripherals and the new technologies of the maker movement, we really can bring to life the Piagetian idea that to understand is to invent. The only question we need to be asking is, what do the kids do with computers in schools? It's mind-boggling to me that 24 years after the first schools in Australia committed to every child having a computer, we're still arguing about it. And the Los Angeles Unified School District where I live says they're going to spend $1 billion on iPads that won't go on the World Wide Web. When the kids took them home, they thought they were broken. They fixed them. They got them confiscated, and now the program's been shut down. And yet, there's something else happening in the world. There's this Maker Faire movement where hundreds of thousands of people come together in the greatest show and tell on earth. Remember show and tell? We used to have it in school. Now we have it in fairgrounds and at church basements and at scout halls where people drive cupcake cars and offer courses in lockpicking and soldering and painting and welding and programming and build giant mousetraps, where kids and adults marvel in each other's company and challenge one another and create and invent and tinker. And when I went to my first Maker Faire in San Mateo, California, just south of San Francisco 2 years ago, there were 120,000 people there. There were over 150,000 this year. There's 300 of you here. Parents who are involved, who pay $50 to take their kids to see all this stuff and to make things and engage in craft and tinkering and engineering. And if you surveyed the parents and children at a Maker Faire, and there are hundreds of them now around the world, if you surveyed those parents, they've moved well beyond my child is bored in school to school is killing my child. The parents say, look what my kid is capable of doing, and school doesn't give a damn. We've removed evidence of childhood from school. We've taken the play and the tinkering and the engineering and the real science and the real history and the real mathematics out of the daily diet of children. And that breaks my heart because, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not willing to give up on schools. That's where the kids are. And we have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to do things in classrooms with children that should fulfill the dreams of why you became educators in the first place. One of the great things about the Maker movement is that there are kids at the center of it who are heroes and legends, and they're cherished and beloved and heralded, not because they're cute, which they are, but because they have demonstrable competence that's admired by the adults. And they're not just precocious show ponies. They like being in the company of adults because the adults know how to do things that they want to know. So whether it's Kane of Kane's Arcade, some of you have probably seen the video. It's been seen by millions of people. He built an arcade out of cardboard at his father's auto body shop when he had to be there for the summer. Kane, by the way, turned 11 in July and announced his retirement. My friends, super awesome Sylvia and Skylar St. Ledger and Maddie Smith, who's teaching folks at my summer institute how to solder. These kids know stuff. A couple months ago, Intel announced a new microcontroller. The geek community was all excited about it for a lot of reasons. A couple of hours after the announcement, there was a definitive video going viral around the web that explained the new Galileo microcontroller in excruciating detail. And then I thought to myself, I know that voice. And it was Skylar, who's age 12. He was the first expert on the technology, and he was sharing his expertise with the world. Another kid I'm quite fond of, Joey Huddy. He's nicely holding up our new book. Joey designs and manufactures electronics kits for hobbyists. I have no idea what most of them do, but Joey does. And he uses the proceeds from these kits to send himself to Maker Fairs around the world. And those wristbands are the symbol of entry to a Maker Faire. He told me he never takes them off even to shower. If you go to his website called Look What Joey's Making, he admonishes you to don't be bored, make something. And if you click on the About Me page, you'll read a list of the ways in which he's been deemed defective in school, including not knowing his times tables, and the list of medications he's required to take to comply with said school. Except when he's at Maker Faire or the White House, he's the mayor of the place. And in fact, he's on the faculty this summer of my Summer Institute Constructing Modern Knowledge, along with Edith Ackerman and Mitchell Resnick. Edith Ackerman, who worked with Piaget, Papert, and Van Glosserfeld. Joey's there because he knows how to do things that I need my teachers to have access to. So if we want to look at these technologies in context, I need to share a couple of examples with you. The first little video clip comes from Scientific American Frontiers. This is the actor Alan Alda visiting Neil Gershenfeld talking about the idea of personal fabrication, of making technology to solve your own problems. And then I'm going to share some examples of what this looks like in the hands of kids. I'll make sure the audio is high enough, please. Thank you. Volume.
If I had one of these machines at home, you could email me this bike.
Can I try that again? Volume. A little more, please.
If I had one of these machines at home, you could email me this bike.
My sister actually was emailed this bicycle in Sydney, and she's riding one around.
You're kidding?
No, seriously.
Isn't that incredible? So wait a minute. So that means that if I order a bike from a company someday, it won't come in a truck. It'll come, everybody will have one of these machines, and a lot of what we order, lamps, furniture, bicycles, will get emailed to us. We'll have it a few seconds later.
The only thing wrong in what you said is it's not when you order the bicycle, it's when you design the bicycle. When you design the bicycle.
Okay.
Did you recognize what this is?
This is actually a model of Matisse's Blue Nude #2. You can see the leg here, the hind leg, another leg here and the thigh, the arch of the back, the head, and the hand holding the front wheel.
In this How to Make Anything project, it's not just that students learn to make a bicycle, they learn to make their bicycle. Every bicycle is different, and part of expressing yourself in the bicycle you want is what this is all about.
Okay, all right, this will be great. Listen, work on that thing for me.
So off I went on what is certainly the first nude bicycle.
Okay, so if you can't get your heads around the idea of emailing a bicycle to your holiday destination and printing it when you arrive, consider the educational implications of this. This not only blurs the artificial boundaries between subject areas, it dissolves the distinctions between art and science and technology and humanities and engineering. It completely obliterates the destructive cleavage between what we consider vocational and academic education. Because when the same technology and process skills are required and found in the physics lab, the art studio, and the auto shop, we can cease to sort kids into piles of winners and losers. We can prepare all kids for a world in which they can decide in which direction they're going to go. You know, I have two nephews who are in high school. They're going to go to university. Their father went to high school with me. He dropped out. He was my age. He was in my class. I didn't know him because he dropped out of high school. Now, that was extraordinary. No one dropped out of my high school. And he works with his hands, and he works in an auto body shop, and he's a terrific guy, and he's incredibly clever, and he can make things and fix things in ways I would never dream of. And when we were walking around one of the maker fairs in New York City a few months ago, he was marveling at the cool fabrication technology, but lamenting that his children's school will never have any of this stuff because it's expensive and it's complex. And I suggested to him, with a reasonable degree of certainty, there's a very good chance your kid's school already has some of this stuff. The problem is your college-bound, your university-bound sons will never see that wing of the building because doing things with your hands is where the dumb kids were sent for generations. And we've undervalued learning with our hands, heads, and heart, and overvalued learning just with our heads. And that's inadequate for the 21st century. This is a photograph at Maker Faire, the robot petting zoo. Parents queued up for their toddlers to spend a couple of minutes in the pen playing with the robots that beeped and burped and squawked and blew bubbles and ran away when you chased them. The kids behaved in a way indistinguishable from if they had a kitten or a goat or a lamb or a pig to play with. It reminds us of what Alan Kay said, that technology is anything that wasn't there when you were born. These kids live in a different time. They have different expectations. They have the opportunity to be engineers where theoretical principles can be put into concrete action, and then you can have a meaningful context for learning the maths and science that we hope and want kids to learn. So I want to introduce you to my friend super awesome Sylvia. That's her recently at the White House with her watercolor bot that takes an image that you draw on an iPad and creates a watercolor version of it. When Sylvia was 8, she began making videos modestly called Super Awesome Sylvia's Super Awesome Maker Show. And they're put on the web, and they encourage you, like Joey Huddy, to don't be bored, make something, but in her case, to engage in do-it-yourself technology or engineering projects at home. She's now 12 years old. This video is one of her first. She's using the Arduino microcontroller, a sort of robotics engine that's being used by amateurs and professionals alike. That's open source, meaning that people continuously improve it at about the same price. And if you're a kid in Soweto who has access to enough broken refrigerators, you can make one yourself as well. It requires teachers to understand it at a conceptual level that we haven't had to deal with technology for a while, because if you bought red ones last month, they're probably going to be blue next month, and the ports might be in different places, or it might have a little more memory or new processor. But this is part of the maker revolution. And I want you to watch just a couple minutes of a heavily edited episode of Super Awesome Sylvia's Super Awesome Maker Show, and think about what it means to be an 8-year-old in 2013.
Super Awesome Maker Show. Go on now, gotta see this. Oh yeah, you're gonna love it. Da 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 dee da da. So this show's really really cool. Go on now, gotta see this. Oh yeah, you're gonna love it. Da 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 dee da. So the Super Awesome Maker Show. Yeah. For our first project, we will be making an adjustable strobe. For this flashy build, we will need an Arduino, any kind will do. We'll be using the Duomilanove 328, a computer and a USB cable to upload to the Arduino, a bright LED. I chose blue because it's cool, but you can use any color you want. And finally, a potentiometer, if you have one. You can make this without it, but it's cooler with one. First, take your Arduino and push the LED into pins 13 and ground. Now it's time for SmartBot's Thinking Lab, where we try to explain how things work. LEDs, or light-emitting diodes, are really just diodes that emit light. Electricity will only flow through them in one direction. When electricity flows in the right direction, you get light. Hi! Now take your potentiometer, take the first lead and plug it into 5 volts. Now take the last lead and attach it to ground. Then take the middle lead and push that into one of the analog pins. I chose pin 2 because it's the coolest of the analog pins. I'm cool. This allows you to very carefully send a voltage between 0 and 5 volts to analog pin 2. This value is read by the Arduino as a number between 0 and 1023. Then using a little math, this number becomes the delay value for our strobe. Now we take the source code available at tm42.com/strobe and upload it to the Arduino. Now that our code is compiled and uploaded, we can experiment. Here's one of my desk fans. We remove the front grill so we can see it better. Now we just turn on the Arduino and turn off the lights. By turning the potentiometer, it looks like it changes the speed of the fan, eventually slowing it down to a crawl. It's really still moving pretty fast though, so don't touch it. If you don't have a potentiometer, you can substitute any number you want for the analog read value in the code. It won't be easy to change, but with some trial and error, you can have it tuned in no time. The code me and my dad made is open to any number of adjustments in range, speed, and output. You can even add a display to guess the RPM of spinning objects. The possibilities go on and on.
So, when she gets to 10th grade, is she going to be required to use Microsoft Word to make a travel brochure? I'm working on a project with her, and it's very clear that she's in charge. Wonderful little kid who's, lucky enough to still have some time left after school to work on projects like this that matter to her and to the world, the couple million people who watch her videos. Because, frankly, her classroom hasn't yet been flipped on top of her. But as soon as it is, she'll get to work a second unpaid shift of homework that will interfere with her ability to share her knowledge with the world. This is one of my favorite moments in a video clip where she's talking about how you send between 0 and 5 volts through the Arduino and in order to make the light flash. And that's communicated to the computer by using a number between 0 and 1,023, and then using a little math, you can determine the delay value of the strobe. That's the entire K-8 math curriculum anywhere in the world. If a kid is able to express and use that knowledge, they're well and truly done with what we've expected of them forever. Let me share another kid example with you. Kid I'll call Hugo, built a robot, claps his hands, the robot starts moving, claps his hands, he stops. He has to deal with controlling for ambient noise, so if someone dropped a book, his robot doesn't go flying. He learned the powerful lesson that school is the only place where something equals something else. Everywhere else in the universe, you're off by a little, you're close enough, you're within a range. School is something always equals something else. He had to deal with inequality. You know, when you ask kids to use greater than and less than, they scrunch up their faces and go, is the alligator's mouth open this way or open that way? And they can't quite understand because they're trying to remember the trick, but he had to understand it here. And I got involved with some other kids and lost track of what he was working on. And when I turned around, he had gotten himself a piece of paper and a clipboard and pencil. He had a calculator under the chair. He had a yardstick because we're still taking a wait and see on that whole metric deal in America. And he had changed his program so that when he clapped his hands, the vehicle would go forward for 1 second and stop. He would measure how far it traveled, wrote it down, and he would do multiple trials of this. I immediately knew what question he was trying to answer. He wanted to know how fast his car went. Now, ladies and gentlemen, that's where the fun and games traditionally ends and several years of torturous unit conversions begin. Because if I asked you to convert 31 inches per second to miles per hour, you'd run screaming from here. And we might get 100 different answers if I handed you all a piece of paper and pencil. But I took a chance. I went to my laptop. I opened it up. I went to wolframalpha.com. I typed 31 inches per second in. It told me that was 787 millimeters per second, 0.7874 meters per second, 1.76 miles per hour. Bingo, Hugo has his answer. And then it gave me a bit of trivia that I hadn't anticipated. It said, as a comparison of speed, 1.76 miles per hour is 0.7 of a typical human walking speed of 2.5 miles per hour. In the time it took me to read that, Hugo was already back to work on his robot, making it go faster than a human walks. Now, for those of you who would suggest that using Wolfram Alpha, which can incidentally solve every single problem in the maths curriculum and show all work, if you think that this is cheating, I'm looking around, I recognize that about 35–40% of you are wearing eyeglasses, you cheaters. Call me a utopian, a cockeyed optimist. I am actually idealistic enough to believe that in my lifetime we're going to let kids use calculators and stop arguing about it. I know. What if all the batteries are dead in the universe and the sun is blocked for an indefinite period of time and you can't charge the calculators? Well, you know, if the sun is blocked for an indefinite period of time, you probably should step away from the homework and worry about the apocalypse. The lesson here is that if you make simple things easy to do, you make complexity possible. When the learner is able to learn what they need to know when they want to know it, they're able to do much more sophisticated things. So they can build their own simulations of life in the Middle Ages, or their own video games rather than just being consumers of them, or their own tools for exploring geometry. Or in the case of this 11-year-old who was explaining his turtle art program where he was using mathematical principles to create beautiful art, he was using excruciatingly precise mathematical language in explaining his project to his principal, but every so often he said, and then it teleports. And at the end of this whimsical example from this kid, he turned to me and he said, hey, Gary, what does x-coordinate mean? And he had been using coordinates fluently in the creation of this work that mattered to him. He just didn't know the vocabulary word. That is maths education on its head. It's 180 degrees from the way we traditionally teach maths to children, which is making them memorize a bunch of vocabulary without any context or experience. I could then define that term and he would understand it for the rest of his life. But instead, we have spiraling curricula, which is an admission of failure, because we teach them but they don't stay taught, so we're going to have to do it over and over again. Kids can build their own tools for exploring geometry, and as the tool gets more sophisticated, they learn more geometry, and as they learn more geometry, their tool gets more sophisticated. We can have kids engaged in real work. And we recognize that we stand on the shoulders of giants. So I want to deal with another big idea for a couple of minutes, the Reggio Emilia approach, an approach to early childhood education from a town in Italy of about 160,000 people that spends 18% of its municipal budget every year on the education of 40% of the eligible 0 to 6-year-olds. Reggio Emilia is a place, it's an approach to education, but it's not a system. There's no set of rules. They believe it has to reflect the inquiry and the curiosity and the needs and passions and culture of the children in the community that they serve. They talk about education in terms of the defense and promotion of the rights and potentials of children. They believe that children are competent, and they're competent enough to use authentic materials and tools, even tools that we would never let a high school kid use. You may see 3-year-olds with box cutters or sledgehammers because they're taught to use them properly. They believe that if you give kids paper plates and paper cups, they never learn how to handle glass and china properly. And that school should be part of a continuum between home, school, and community. That the classroom should be inviting and inspirational as the third teacher. They talk about the teacher in the role of researcher, whose primary responsibility is to understand the thinking of each child and to prepare the environment for the next epiphany that a child might have. In each school in Reggio Emilia, there's 2 specialized roles. The atelierista, who could be like the IT tech support person or computer coordinator, who helps children amplify their potential with material, with visual arts. And the pedagogista, who's the opposite of the special education department, because it's the job of the pedagogista as the learning theorist to help the teachers understand the thinking of each child. Loris Malaguzzi, who was the father of the Reggio Emilia approach more than 50 years ago, talked about honoring and respecting the 100 languages of children, and in order to do so, having each classroom be 1,000 laboratories. That they believe you don't build pens around children. You find ways to use all of the things in their world in a constructive fashion that will build upon their inquiry. So there's this continuity between home and schools where kids are engaged in real things, where even toddlers may be involved in the preparation of lunch, but they're certainly involved in setting the place settings or the table for their peers to eat in a beautiful fashion. Jamie Oliver did a series in the United States where he found that it was commonplace for children in schools not to be given utensils to eat with. They're treated like animals. They might as well just throw the slop on the floor. But I have video of 2-year-olds in high chairs in Reggio Emilia serving one another pasta and using knives and forks and passing the plate, and you would think it's puppets because we've made our kids so dependent on us. And there's all the maths that's learned in doing so. And we can have kids using soldering irons at 7 years old. And when the opera house curtain, the opera house at the center of our city for 500 years in their case, needs a new curtain, 4-year-olds can design it. And it can be something of meaning and beauty and substance that lives in the community for decades to come. And one of the most important lessons we learn from Reggio Emilia is how to set a prompt and the importance of setting a good prompt. They don't say it's Martin Luther King's birthday and he had a dream for making the world a better place, and you give the kids a worksheet with the inch on the bottom for them to write their dream for making the world a better place. Nor do they say, scientists think the planet is warming up, use iMovie to reverse global warming, or use GarageBand to eradicate famine. They say, can you build a park for the birds who come to visit? And 3-year-olds immediately know what that means. And they get busy right away, and they saw and cut and measure and build and refine and brainstorm and debug and tinker and engineer. And when one kid has an epiphany and says, hey, can we make it an amusement park for the birds? The teacher might ask, what's in an amusement park? The kids will say, I don't know, rides, water features, places to eat, places to rest. And again, they're off to the races, working on something. And they make their corner of the world a beautiful place, and by extension, make the world itself a beautiful place. The lesson we can learn from this is a good prompt has the ability for us to get our arms around it, sink our teeth into it, get our heads around it, even if only to understand that we need to learn a lot more in order to solve that problem. I work in a school as a director of STEM in Los Angeles. I saw on the whiteboard for an entire school year, learn your fractions, and it was just making me crazy. And I finally said to the 5th graders, look, you have micro worlds. the first kid who can write a program that'll let me type any fraction into it, even a hard one, and draw a graphical representation of that fraction as parts of a circle, I'll take out to lunch. I wasn't sure if I was allowed to do that. A kid raised their hand and said, can we work together? And I said, sure, despite the fact that my costs just went up dramatically. And 2 days later, 3 10-year-old girls had written a program that you see in front of you. The math curriculum only wants these kids to tell them what a numerator and denominator is. It doesn't want them to understand anything. The kids now not only know the vocabulary, they're dealing with angle measure and radius and circumference and division and variable and procedurality and conditionals and debugging and a whole lot more. So you can say that spending 2 days learning to do this is a waste of time, but I think it pales in comparison to spending several years on the topic. Now, what to do? I often wondered how it was possible that at the end of my 4-day Teacher Institute, folks could do things that 2 years ago would have earned them a spot on the TED stage and 5 years ago a PhD from MIT or Stanford. How is it that kids in a workshop of mine can exceed their teachers' expectations in a matter of minutes or hours? How is it possible that kids who have never used the computer for music or learned music theory or taken a music class use their computer to compose a symphony that brings Lady Macbeth to life in a 10th grade English class? And I formed a pedagogical hypothesis that I think explains this phenomena that I call a good prompt is worth 1,000 words. That with a good prompt, challenge, problem, or motivation, appropriate materials, sufficient time, and a supportive culture, including a range of expertise, we can solve problems that are bigger than ourselves. If you're missing any of these 4 elements, they're self-evident what you need to do about it. I was working with 3rd graders in a school in South Korea. I helped launch 4 years ago where we gave a laptop to every kid down to 1st grade. And the kids had their laptops for a few days. They were playing with these robotics materials. And I put a piece of masking tape on one end of the table, a piece of masking tape on the other end. And I said, make a machine that when I press the go button will land as close to the finish line as possible. And to make it a little more challenging, I told them they could only test it on the course 3 times. So they had to extrapolate and predict a little bit. And this is the result. Now, if you were to Google MIT 3rd year engineering challenge, it looks a lot like that. The task is similar, the reaction is similar. These kids are being engineers. Now, I recognize that sometimes you can't have kids building ballerinas or racing cars or writing Shakespearean symphonies. You have to teach something that's in the curriculum, something that's on the syllabus. Okay, fine. But you want to do so in a way that the prompt is appropriate, that's going to inspire the greatest output from the kids. And in the cases where you yourself as a teacher needs to set a prompt that's not rooted in the natural inquiry or curiosity of kids, then I think your prompts need to have 3 elements. The first is brevity. It should fit on a Post-it note. It should fit on a T-shirt. It should have 1 period in it. I didn't say, and then the second thing is, it should be ambiguous. I didn't say to the kids that they needed to build a vehicle with 4 wheels and 2 motors that weighed 30 grams or more. I said, make something that when I press the go button will end close to the finish line. If the kids figured out a way to build a vehicle that would launch into orbit, circumnavigate the globe, and land on the finish line, then they had exceeded my expectations. They weren't boxed in by an overly prescriptive rubric. And the last element of a good prompt is immunity to assessment. That means that you're doing it because it matters to you. What's a 93 in a poem or a B- in a music composition or an 87 in a robot? The best problems push up against the persistence of reality. That doesn't require us to add failure to the curriculum. The latest terrible idea that's being given to us as educators from get-rich-quick books sold in airport gift shops. Failure is not virtuous, it's judgment. It's something someone else does to you to make you feel bad. It's a sanction. It's punishment. How can it be used as a threat and motivation at the same time? We don't need to add failure to the curriculum. We need to add real life to the curriculum because there are challenges that we encounter all the time when we're trying to do stuff that matters to us. So there's a lot of discussion about design thinking around these technologies. And in our book, Invent to Learn, we recognize that there were all sorts of design cycles that were being developed, and people were getting famous by adding steps to them. In most cases, it mirrors the writing process. But now they're getting up to 12 and 13 steps, and I see a lot of things being done in the name of design thinking that has neither design or thinking involved. Where we're a little too clever by half and a little too meta, and kids are being taught the process and never actually engaging in the process of designing anything. So being a bit of a smartass, I gave myself the challenge of, Polya got the design process down to 4 steps. Could I name that tune in 3? And we came up with something we call TMI, which could stand for a lot of things. It could stand for too much information, or too many interruptions, or too much imposition, or too much invasion, or too much instruction, or think, make, improve. Any kid can understand that, and improve could be fix or make better. If they understand think, make, improve, they can get busy. They can do something. They can engage in experiences that will lead to epiphanies and understanding and new questions. Maybe we need to look at kids' work through the aesthetic of an artist. Is what they did beautiful or meaningful or thoughtful or personally sophisticated? Is it shareable and respect the audience? Does it move them or somebody else? Does it have the slightest chance of enduring? You know, think about the difference between a maths assignment and something that happens in an art classroom. Which one does mom frame? Which one do they keep to show at the bridal shower? Usually not the algebra worksheet. And as an aside, this week is the week of an hour of code. Right? Because a bunch of Silicon Valley billionaires figured out that in between not paying taxes and robbing the schools of their revenue base, they thought that it'd be fun for kids to use computers to program. So last year it was a month of code. Apparently this year it's an hour. And it's a trivialization of something really powerful. I'm waiting for the hour of algebra, as is every child alive today. I go to a lot of conferences where friends of mine even present really good work, things I admire. And they often say, look at this, look how cool it is, and the kids were so engaged, and the test scores went up, and we did it for 2 hours or 2 days or 2 class periods, and I think to myself, well, it must not be that hard to raise test scores then. And then the thing I really think about is, when do kids get to do something longer than the course of an antibiotic? When do they get to become good at something? When do they get to use a computer in a way that's like playing Beethoven, or hitting a home run, or kicking a goal? And again, my friend Petrie in 1917 wrote, I do not remember the school ever staying with a beautiful idea long enough to have it become part of the children's lives. I think this is as true today as it ever has been, if not more so. When I walk through schools, I often have to ask myself, have the kids ever been here? There's no evidence that the place belongs to children. There are things laminated everywhere and stuff written in the teacher's handwriting and rules posted. But where are the pirate ships and the movies and the symphonies and the robots and the plays and the puppet shows and the cooking? And we need to wonder how it's possible that we can teach 21st century learners if we haven't learned anything ourselves this century. That's why it's so important for you to be at events like this. At my summer institute, where teachers have the opportunity to spend 4 days messing about with all the sort of modern technology, with a rich faculty who can support them in projects that are personally meaningful, and have access to some of the great minds of our times who they spend time with, not just listen to, they're able to go further than we could have ever thought was possible otherwise. We can't behave as if children are competent if we believe that the teachers are incompetent. So the teachers do great things. They do amazing things. They make robots to respond to words in Twitter feeds and bow ties that change color to match your shirt. And they make movies and compose music and build harps out of conductive thread and launch weather balloons into space and use 3D printers and solder and program and interact with an 87-year-old jazz legend who reminded us of something very wise and important. What was good is good. This week I had the great privilege of working at a school here in Hong Kong where we did some logo activities that were 45 years old. And the kids were just as excited and engaged and in powerful learning that they would have been in 1968. You saw a shirt go by. Teachers drew the circulatory system on their shirt. Another one drew the digestive system on her shirt. They connected the shirt with conductive thread and conductive paint to a makey-makey connected to a computer. And when they pointed to objects, parts of their body, a tutorial on the screen took them on a tour of that organ system. In some ways, it's the same old crappy science fair poster board, but it's a lot more intimate, and it's a lot more complex, and it's a lot more three-dimensional. People can do powerful things. Teachers who have had these kinds of experiences create a context for learning in which their students feel powerful and empowered, where Kate DeBoer, a 7th grade humanities teacher, spent one summer writing computer programs that generate Shakespearean insults, and the next year had photographs of Islamic tiling patterns that she had taken in Spain, and spent 4 days learning how to write computer programs to create mathematical representations of those tiling patterns. And when Cynthia Solomon, the great computer scientist and one of the 3 people who created Logo, who was a member of my faculty each year, walked up behind her and said, "Have you considered line of symmetry?" All of her work bloomed and came to fruition. Where teachers are making phonographs that work and building cell phone chargers out of Lego and string despite being social studies teachers. We're at a moment in time where critical decisions in stance and direction must be made. This is a dark period for education. This is a time where you're being called names and powerful forces want to replace you with YouTube videos and multiple choice quizzes. And you can't allow it. And the way you push back is by creating compelling models of kids engaged in great things, who are excited to return to school, who are learning, who can share their knowledge with others, who are proud of being part of your educational community and can energize a community to rally behind you. Any teacher who thinks they can be replaced by a computer probably should be. The best advice that I can give you, the best advice I can leave any audience with that I have the privilege of speaking with and any school that I have the opportunity to visit is less us, more them. Anytime you think you should engage in some educational transaction on behalf of the child, you should take a deep breath and ask yourself, is there less that I could do and more that they can do? That I could shift more agency and responsibility to the learner? So we look at all these common principles, and we have to think about how the technology can play a role in them and how we can play a role in bringing that technology to the kids. It's Christmas time, so I'll share one last story with you. This is kids building digital gingerbread houses.
CD?
No!
Well,
See it work.
the lights flash, the tree inside here, spins around, and it plays Jingle Bells.
So what could be better than computers and icing? And we've got trees spinning and lights flashing and doorbells ringing and carols playing. The primary teacher in me knew that you could build a gingerbread house out of graham crackers and icing. And by the way, the video that's playing now is the work of kids in a prison for teenagers where I conducted my doctoral research. So that's actually the work of the most menacing children in society. And on the right-hand side is a photograph of a digital gingerbread house we built in a 5th grade class that I work in Los Angeles last year. And while we were building the digital gingerbread houses, the door to the classroom opened up a crack, and I saw the director of admissions head pop in. And I said, "Come on in, you're welcome. I'm not afraid to have anyone visit my class when I'm teaching." And she said, "I've got a lot of people with me." I said, "That's fine, they're welcome as well." It turns out she was leading an admissions tour, and she had 30 prospective parents with her trying to decide whether to invest a large sum of money and trust this school with their child. And in they walked into this icing and candy insanity that was taking place. And they talked to the kids and they observed their work, and then they left, and I thought nothing of it. And later in the day, I was walking down the hallway, and I heard as I passed the administrative offices, "Hey, thanks a lot, pal." And I kind of stopped in my tracks and thought, okay, great, now what have I done? And the director of admissions said to me, "You know, I had to spend over an hour trying to convince those prospective parents that that wasn't staged for their benefit." And I thought for a moment, and I was really moved by the idea that maybe, just maybe, parents aren't the enemy. They're not concerned with beating Helsinki in long division. They don't care if their kids can use all 27 spelling words in a sentence. Maybe, perhaps, they want their kids to come home from school excited about what they did, and when asked, "What did you do today?" they'll have some story to share that's compelling, that describes something powerful that the kids were engaged in. You know, I mentioned at the beginning we know what to do. If you're a teacher that's old enough to remember baking cookies and singing songs and playing math games and microscopes and hamsters and nature walks and making puppets out of Pop-Tart boxes and putting on plays and conducting experiments and doing magic tricks and using Cuisinart rods, then you have an obligation to return that stuff to your classroom as soon as you return. Not just for the kids that you have the privilege and opportunity to serve, but for a generation of colleagues who don't know it's possible. I was at the very end of the teacher education in the United States when, in order to be a primary teacher, you had to learn how to play the piano a little bit and teach science and phys ed and make puppets out of Pop-Tart boxes. And right after I graduated, legislators all over the world, parliaments all over the world said, "Hey, teaching ain't nothing. We can replace you with an incompetent, zealot and teach for America or teach for Australia. Why isn't there surgeon for America or hedge fund trader for Australia?" And they've been taught nothing but animal control and curriculum delivery. And they're well-intentioned. They took the job because they love children. They want to make the world a better place. But they don't know that these opportunities exist. They don't know how to use these technologies. They don't know how to engage with kids in meaningful projects. And those of us who know better need to do better. It might be a wintry morning where it's Saturday and you've been coaching netball all week or marking exams or running student council meetings, and you're exhausted and you hit the snooze alarm 18 or 20 extra times, and you finally roll out of bed at 11:45 and think, "I have to get the weekend started," and you go for the carton of milk to make a cup of coffee because you need that caffeine injection. And as you reach for the carton of milk, your kid put it back empty, or it's spoiled because you don't have time to go to the shop, but you really need that cup of joe, so you throw on an over. And a hat, perhaps, and you go off to the local Quickie Mart or 7-Eleven or supermarket or milk bar. And as you walk out of the shop with your carton of milk, congratulating yourself for having gone unnoticed, a former student sees you from across the parking lot and comes running with their arms open wide and wants to give you a big embrace, and maybe you turn your head away because you haven't brushed your teeth yet or you're having a bad hair day. And they always want to reminisce. And they say, "You remember that time we..." And I assure you it's not crammed for an exam or complied with the Common Core. What they want to reminisce about is some project that you engaged them in, some memory that you created. The noblest calling of any teacher is to be engaged in the business of making memories. And the reason why computers matter and computing as a verb matters so much, as I said earlier, is because it extends the range and breadth and depth of projects that are possible. And it is the project itself that's the activity that builds memories, that makes memories. I thank you for the work that you do. I hope you have a great holiday. The kids are lucky to have you. If you don't stand between them and the madness, no one will. Thank you very much, folks.